Blunders to Blessings with Kerim, Season 1, Episode 2. Michael Smedley from Kodak to Digital Mastery.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Blunders to Blessings with Kerim. In a world obsessed with success stories, Blunders to Blessing dares to challenge the status quo and shine a spotlight on the often overlooked journey of failure. In this podcast series, you'll hear from successful individuals who have faced adversity head on, sharing their biggest blunders and the invaluable wisdom gained from each experience. Today, I have the exciting opportunity to talk to Michael Smedley, a Melbourne native who boasts over 35 years in sales and project managing. Focusing on print and digital media, his expertise spans from management, direct sales, SEO, graphic design, website design, and multimedia production. Known for his strategic insight and innovative approach, Michael has successfully managed numerous high-profile projects. His extensive experience in SEO, print, video, and audio production complements his technical prowess, making him a versatile asset in the industry and business he works for. Passionate about communication and technology, Michael continues to drive impactful results for his clients and projects. Michael, that's an amazing journey that you've been on. I had the pleasure over the years to work with you. I remember when both of us went to New Zealand to present. What an incredible experience that was, and I thank you for it. And
no worries,
thank you again for being here today.
No problems.
Michael, as you know, most cultures and the education system looks at failure as a negative thing. And as we grow up, it also becomes a stigma. What is your definition of the word failure, and how has it changed over time?
I suppose initially when you start your working career, failure is something that you see as a big negative, and because if you fail too much, then you get the sack, or you lose the client or something, and sometimes that works that way. But what I've come to learn over the years is that it is also your biggest learning and teaching exercise. And even if you lose a job or a client or some situation changes because you fail, it's the best way to learn. And I actually think that it's not your successes that define you, it's your failures, because your failures are actually the landmarks of your growth throughout your career and your life. So it's a really powerful and strong thing, I think.
Absolutely, and it's interesting how you mentioned that your failures define you, and you're absolutely correct. I've found that even throughout my experience, the failures that have occurred where you have this option to quit or to continue is that defining moment, right? What would you say, over your many years of experience, was maybe, the top three, or, the top failure where you could say, this was a real blunder, but, I learned these three important things that it actually, were the basis on the success of the next thing that I did?
So probably the biggest one, I reckon, was that I was with Kodak for many years, and Kodak was a company that went from, almost Apple-like size. It had nearly 200,000 staff globally, and in the 90s, it was one of the biggest employers on the planet. It had super profitable business, and then of course technology changed, and it didn't adapt. So it went from nearly 200,000 staff down to 5,000 staff globally. And through that period of time, which is over call it 10 years, I remained working for the company. And what happens over that period of time is you lose colleagues and divisions and all that sort of stuff. And what you ultimately did, and where my failure in that, is you're holding on for what I would call the payout. And what happened is opportunities came up to increase my career and all that sort of stuff. I had a brand new family at the time, and I basically held tough. And I thought that I had probably the opportunities and talent to go on to other bigger and better things, but I probably wasted 5 years of my life hanging around for a payout. Ultimately, I did get a payout at a point in time, and I pretty much had to force it at one point in time. But I wasted 5 years of what was probably my late 30s, and it sort of taught me a really valuable lesson. And it's a failure, a personal one, but the failure was to not seize on something and wait around for something that ultimately just basically was a boat anchor for me personally, because I've just missed so many opportunities as a result of that. And and a couple other things that sort of similar is that I think that the things, like there are projects that go wrong and other things like that. I actually find some of that stuff the biggest teachable moment. So I don't look back at those sort of failures and think of them as failures. I actually think of them as growing experiences. But I think that one has taught me that, don't waste time. Is if you want to go after something, and hanging around for a payout. And many people I know are in companies where they go, I just, I've got a bad boss or a bad situation or a bad something. And I've heard many people say that on your deathbed, you don't regret the things you did do, you regret the things you didn't do. And that was a story of me not doing something. And I found that to my biggest failure and my biggest learning, because I'm not going to make those mistakes again.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly as well on that one there, because when you're the challenge is that when you're in your 30s, you think you're going to live forever, right? Well, and you've got all the time in the world. There's an element of that, right? Because you're still, you got that energy of still a 20-year-old, and so there's that element that you are going to live forever. So when you do look back, maybe in your 50s, you go, hey, those 5 years, if I only had them now, I would have, treated them with a little bit more value, right? Because as human beings, we have two things that are natural to us. One is our energy and where we focus our energy, and the other one is our time and how we use our time. And I think as time goes on, both of them become really more valuable to us, because they just simply do, because as time goes on, you have less of them, right? So you start to think about, where do I invest that time? Where do I invest that energy? And you start to become very clear about what outcomes you want from it as well.
Back in the day there, and you and I know about this, and maybe that's for the listener or the viewer, we both met each other in the print industry, and that industry, although it still exists, it sort of was the primary way people communicated back in the day. So there wasn't social media, and it was either you get your news through newspapers or magazines, and print was a huge industry. And there are people still in the business today that should have made the move out of that industry many, many years ago. And I probably saw the writing on the wall many, many years ago. And those 5 or 6 years that I wasted in I shouldn't say wasted, but I spent more time not making that move. And there are still people that are in that industry now that I'm sure that if they had their time over, they would have moved. And fear, doubt, uncertainty, that's in a way a failure, or it's something that some people would probably regret.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you're absolutely right. It was the largest manufacturing industry in Australia. It employed the largest amount of people in the country. Everybody was lined up behind it, because it wasn't, as most people, they think about print, they might think about magazines, but it was such a diverse industry, where packaging is still a vibrant sector of the industry. But you're right. I think at the time when we were still in it, it would have been somewhere around $14 billion GDP industry. I think now it's probably around 4. So it's a shadow of itself. And I think there was an element of it's going to change that kept a lot of people there. But the reality is that it was never going to change. It was getting eaten alive from every possible aspect, whether the big jobs were going off to China, the little jobs were taken up by the little photocopy, practitioners, and people were bringing some of that in-house because the photocopiers were around. So I was getting eaten from every potential. The entry level had been reduced so much that every Tom, Dick and Harry was in it. So it wasn't the elite industry that it once was, where every printer was basically a very wealthy man. And even when you look at some of the wealthiest men today in Australia, like the Murdochs, like the Packers, they all came from print, right? So certainly very.
But if you take it even further back, you think of what they were really in was that they were in the information supplying game, and print was the medium. And that was the thing that I found that I probably saw that the medium was changing. And it still, as you say, it still exists, and it is still one of the many valid ways of communicating today. Signage or packaging is still a big business. And if you walk down a supermarket aisle and a product pops out at you and you say, oh, what's that? It's print that's doing the communicating, whether it's talking to you from the point of sale or the packaging. Print is at the underpinning that. It's still big, but their business was effectively communication. And and that's what I've learned as well, is that when you sort of come to that paradigm shift, that you're not just in an industry and you're in a communication industry and you're trying to communicate a concept or thing, then you can start to be a bit more strategic with your career and your focus. And back to the failure thing, I didn't see that back then, but I see it now, and I'm sort of more focused that it is part of things, but ultimately it's communication that drives what I suppose your and my careers.
Yeah, and look, I had a little bit the same sentiment. I probably spent a bit too long in that sector. But the silver lining, when I look back, what did I learn about spending 10 extra years that I probably shouldn't have in the sector, is that it was like a university degree. What I learned about HR, what I learned about operations, what I learned about IT, what I learned about designing customer journeys, what I learned about so many different areas, what I learned about sales. I feel like I came out of that industry with a couple of business degrees. Understanding finance, so acutely that, because of the industry, the way it was, and as it was shrinking, sometimes your net didn't come from your top line figure, but it came from your bottom line, from, stripping out expenses. There was so much to be learned. One of the biggest lessons I learned was this idea of third-party resellers and not owning the client directly. And you and I watched all these printing companies that lined up behind the print brokers, the print agencies, or the ad agencies, or the design studios, and then at the end they had no relationship with the clients. And I learned that we had a policy that said we weren't going to deal with third-party resellers, and so that policy paid off hugely a decade later, because then we cross-sell and upsell a whole range of different products and services. So, when you look back at those 5 years and you say, yes, you know what, maybe it was time to go, but what was the silver lining? What was the lesson that you learned as well? And I know that everybody talks about and have spoken about this idea and this concept of failing quickly, right? Probably there's an element that we can both learn from that.
Yeah.
But we both stuck it out.
We did.
A little bit longer than you, but I guess I worked out what that silver lining was for me, and I often refer back to what did I do when I was in the print, in this area and that area, what were the mistakes I made, what I learned. Like I know I learned one that I apply a lot more now, which is I always used to hire quickly and fire slowly. Now I've learned, you've got to hire slowly and fire quickly, right?
That's absolutely, yeah. Like if someone doesn't work out, make that decision quickly and rip the Band-Aid off. Yeah, I agree. And that's, I've made that mistake many times as well.
So what was the lessons? What was the silver lining about those 5 years? I mean, okay, you've gone back, you've said, all right, 5 years.
Look, the silver lining, probably like you said, that sort of I learned as Kodak as a business went smaller and smaller, I got more and more responsibility. Resellers, I was a sort of a business mentor. I did a whole bunch of things, and I learned about sort of the mechanics of how international businesses work and transfer pricing and all that controversial stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff I probably learned through that journey. But I probably the why it was something that I reflect on as a failure now is because I was aware of that. It's not the fact that I was just looking for that next opportunity. It was a little bit of fear of the unknown, fear of going for it, because back when I started in print, and I'm old enough where I started in print when I was doing a thing they call pre-press, and pre-press had consolidated from 3 trades into 1 trade, and it only happened a few years before I started. And it was this consolidation of the industry generally, and I was sort of lived in between the printing machine and the artwork, and I sort of lived in that middle piece to get everything ready for print. And I sort of probably, learned about how the whole industry worked, and I went into the supply side, and so I learned about all this stuff throughout the process. So the 5 years, even though it was I'd hung on too long, back in the day, I was the first person on the computer. I was the first person to see technology taking over that graphic reproduction business. And I was the guy putting, I want to go to get trained on this. I was the guy looking at that. So I did it when I was in my 20s, but I didn't do it when I was in my 30s, because I saw that digital is important in the whole mix of medias back then as it was. And yeah, I started my journey in that way too late, even though I knew about it. That was probably my biggest display. But the silver lining was all the other stuff I learned about, and that holds me true today, because I had a business in my 20s, like a retail business, and that's my MBA. I think as someone like yourself who's owned a business, I think that when you lose money, you learn about profit and loss pretty quick. I learned the hard way through my late 20s, and I learned a lot of stuff that I will take into my 40s, which I'm a little bit older than that now, but that I take that into my 40s. And the silver lining is that how business and all that sort of stuff work is I did take away from that. And watching a company go from this big company to a small company, and a lot of the mistakes were very human, as in, confirmation bias about people thinking film will last forever and all this sort of stuff, watching how even the most powerful humans can make the biggest mistakes.
That's interesting. There's two things that interesting. One, when you spoke about print being a communication tool, and I agree. And I had many arguments when I used to consult to PwC around this, and there was other advisors from the industry who felt that the industry could go in other directions, like 3D printing, and I said no. I tried to bring them back to the fact that print is a communication platform, and we should stick to what we do. But that aside, I'm interested a little bit in digging further. When you were at Kodak, as they were stripping out that maybe top-heavy management, and you were being elevated, you were being exposed to the greater mechanics of this mammoth business that was in freefall, what did you learn? What did you get exposed to that, typically if it had been the way it always had been, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to see and learn?
I saw, and I'm not going to speak specifically about anyone. I saw 2 or 3 different types of people sort of emerge. Is that there's people that checked out and genuinely checked out, waiting for like a handshake to get out of the place. There was the useful people, and the people that would get the work done, because ultimately work had to get done, and what I would call the cockroaches. And these are the political animals that see change as being a way to sort of bubble up the ranks. And a lot of the stuff I learned was very much about the human beings and about how management works, and how these biases and how people and companies are just big organisms, just like a human being. And a lot of retrenchments at the time were really personal, because some people didn't want to be retrenched, and if they hadn't worked a lot of years, they didn't get a lot of money and they didn't have job prospects, especially in a big company like Kodak. Because in Victoria, Kodak had, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 staff at one point, because they had a big plant out in Victoria. So there were mass retrenchments, like 600 or 700 people at a time. I met a lady, and this is sort of an adjacent story. I met a lady a little while back. She's a HR lady, and she worked with people from GMH and the motor industry that actually got shut down in Australia. And she actually worked with these people that basically their whole job was basically disappeared off the face of the planet. That happened to Kodak as well. People basically who were 30 years been working on this big film line or whatever, like this sort of thing. They basically, they're 48 years old with a mortgage and all this sort of stuff, and they basically said, you're retrenched and you maybe get 100 grand, you maybe put a dent in your mortgage. But the big thing was that all the skills and all of the network and everything they built basically gone away, and they're 48 years old. And that was something that I saw really firsthand in Kodak. And this lady that I spoke to saw it in the motor industry as well. And that's where, and this failure, back to what we originally started, this is the thing that sort of really jolted me in that, not to be on your, thinking that the world and big companies and you've got this gravy train. It's, you got to be the master of your own domain.
That's an interesting takeaway, isn't it? But let me ask you something. Okay, you've been there 5 years. You're looking around you. You're watching the island shrink. When did you realize, okay, what was the pivotal point that made you realize, okay, this is not going to work?
Just the revenue, and I knew businesses are like an organism. Money is the blood in the organism, and as the money starts, or the blood starts to disappear, so too. It's not like with all these skills in one industry, when that industry is shrinking, it's either you're one of 4 people going for the job that's equally qualified, but there's only one job and there's 4 people, and if that's extrapolate that out to I sort of realised that I got to get out of this industry generally, and I knew that probably 2 years before I did anything about it, and that's that was the sort of thing as like I had a family, and there's a bunch of contributing factors to that. But my advice to anyone who's listening to this is rip the band-aid off and do it sooner rather than later. I'd probably wait 2 or 3 years too long, and I realised that way before I did anything about it.
So Mick, you were in your late 30s when that decision was made, or were you in your 40s at that point?
I was probably 40 when it was made, and I didn't leave Kodak until I was maybe 45.
Okay, so now you're in your 50s and a little bit more. How did those lessons impact your career for the next 10, 15 years?
Look, so I pivoted to doing software, and I've been in the software business for now nearly 12 years or 13 years, I can't remember, but a few years now. I suppose at that point in time I saw that software generally was going to be the way to move. So I sort of consciously made that decision. And even though I made a couple of interim steps because I didn't have the skills or the CV to get me a 100% job in software. I worked for a company that had a print and a software portion of their business, and I worked for that company for about a year and a half, and they were good to me, and they were good company, and I ran an offshore development house where they were building apps and all that sort of stuff, and they were doing marketing in the real estate industry. So I sort of mixed my software, decided to sort of grow in that. They had a print business as well because they did real estate marketing, and that still is very print driven as well. But that's still it's again the modern marketing mix, which is a little bit of print, a little bit of digital, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I learned a lot through that. And through that journey, I sort of pivoted into software to where I am now. I have nothing to do with print. I'm purely in software 100% these days, and marketing and SEO and a bunch of other big projects, and I run and as it stands today, I'm actually starting to see a similar sort of thing in that and I make this parallel, and maybe this is helpful to some of the people that listen to this, is that print's not gone, and but back in the day, social media started to emerge and all this sort of stuff, and it was a new great thing. But now in 2024, it's still a bit old hat, and to be able to program and build software, it used to be in 2008 used to be a really, really cool skill, and there was lots of opportunities. But nowadays it's still there's tons of business around for it, but nowadays it's about AI and automation. I start to seeing the same sort of evolution that happened when print was starting in decline today. And I'm making, looking at the market generally. Now, I haven't made that clear decision that, is AI the next thing, or being on top of AI the next thing. And so I'm actually looking at what my next thing is, and making sure I don't make the same mistake I made back in the Kodak days of sticking around for that business too long. Because I'm starting to see that now I wrote a little piece of Python code, me and AI, put an Azure function, so I ran a little script in the cloud and automated a whole bunch of marketing related stuff, and something that I would have had to have a developer for, a marketer for. I did it myself, and I did it in an hour, and that's like, this is fundamental change stuff. And it's not that, and myself, and I know you have got these skills, is it used to be that we needed all of these other skills around the outside, but the really core central skill is that the ability to understand people, understand communication, understand how psychology works, because the tools are becoming easier. And I'm starting to see that now. So that's something that I think is a really interesting part of where 2024 takes us.
It's interesting because I'm trying to connect the dots here, or in your journey, and it seems to me that when you were at Kodak and your career started off in that sales role, and I remember when you were in that area, what that actual failure, the gems that you can take away from it is the fact, because the island was shrinking, you were exposed to getting to do more things, and technology was an area that you gravitated to strongly, and that you embraced that whole space, not necessarily at the beginning by choice, because as the island was shrinking, you were asked to do more things, but you were exposed to an area of Kodak that allowed you then to, what I'm trying to say is that became kind of the gem for you, because then you took that, you embraced that experience, and then took it on in other areas of your life, and project managing, as you said, an offshore development team to develop software, to develop apps. And then, but you would never have been exposed to that if you had been in this mammoth business where there was layers and layers and layers and layers of hierarchy, where you were maybe head of sales, and you would have stayed head of sales, and you may not have had the exposure you would have to give you that comprehensive understanding around the technology behind Kodak, which then led you to become a technologist in so many ways. And now we're having this discussion where you're exploring the capabilities of AI, which is definitely going to be the next frontier and the next evolution, not only for industry, but for humanity in so many, many different ways. And I'm starting to think now that those 5 years, yes, 5 years are priceless, but the gems are what brought you to where you are today, working with AI and developing software that once upon a time you would have had to have a team together. Now you're doing it on your own, because you have become this technologist, right? So that's as I listen to you, these are the dots that I'm putting together. This is the failure, but these are the gems, and these are the outcome of the gems they came out of that failure. So
I sort of feel like that you, with this podcast, you obviously speak to people and they talk about their failures, but as you sort of dig deep, you sort of find that this is the way people grow and evolve, and you actually go, well, with 10 years hindsight, you go, well, was it in the time it was a failure, but maybe you can look at it and you go, well, that's probably the start of a new career. For me, it was the start of a new career and learning all this new stuff. And failure is not failure in the truest of senses. It's actually a chance to be reborn and learn new things. So, yeah, I mean, thinking of it purely in that failure sort of context is probably not giving its due course. Yeah.
I mean, you would have had that opportunity had you not stayed there those 5 years, and had you not been in an environment as difficult as you were when you were at Kodak. And I think to talk about, to me, failure is quitting. That's it. It's simple. When you quit, you fail. When you evolve, then that's why we're still around. When something doesn't work, you evolve, or you quit. And the failure is definitely in the quitting. Evolving is what we've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. It's part of our evolution. So that's how I see it. So on that note, I wanted to take you to the next part of the segment and the podcast. And as the founder of One Point, we're just try and make it a bit fun and fast-paced segment called the 1 Point questions. So I'll be asking you to respond with just one word or one line. So let's keep it quick, but insightful. So what's one habit you're trying to quit, Mick?
Apart from red wine?
I don't know if you want to quit that, but
what am I trying to quit? I'm trying to be more communicative with difficult people, and I mean, it's part of my job. Is I do speak to difficult people, and I deal with a lot of CEOs, a lot of very powerful people, and sometimes they're the most prickly, and sometimes I put it off. So I'm trying to quit any fear around dealing with difficult people, and I'm trying to get better at that.
Fair enough. What is one inspirational quote you're kind of obsessed with? It's like this is what my reference point is all the time.
Oh gosh, I saw that, and I don't know whether I have one other than just wake up every day with a lot of energy, and I try. I don't have a quote to do it, but I heard a philosophy about just get up every day, try to be fit and healthy, because everything else becomes easier for that reason. And so he didn't distill it in a quote. It's just a little anecdote about being. Yeah, and that's it. Just to be fit and healthy, because everything is easier when you're fit and healthy.
Well, it's interesting. Just as an addition to that, I was listening to a podcast last night, and it was an ex-Olympian, and she said she suffered from anxiety and depression, and what actually kept her off medication was her training and her fitness. She used to call it her tablet.
I would call it as well. This is it's my antidepressant,
Exactly.
It is so powerful.
It absolutely. And I asked this question because I've got this little saying. It's not one that I've copied, but one that I've always had for myself is, when I say I can't do it, that's the moment I have to do it. So I often try and be careful when I say to myself I can't do that, because then I kind of say, well, now that I've said I can't, I really need to make sure I do this, because otherwise your world shrinks rather than expands. Okay, what is one word that is not in Michael's dictionary?
Not in my dictionary, gosh. Not in my dictionary is can't. I don't see the word I can't do this. I often counsel people that I work with as well, is that people go, oh, this is not for me, or I can't do this. And I suppose as if you succeed in some things, you sort of, I think it's Zhenju, the war of art. No, the art of war, I think it is. And he says, once you see the path to getting successful things, you can see it in all things. And seeing it in all things means that there is I can't do that. It's just that I don't know how, or I need to learn, or I don't see anything in my future that is I can't do it, and something that I don't want to have in my vocabulary either. So
another question is, what's one word that motivates you to try one more time? What's that word that says, you know what, I'm going to give this another crack? What do you say to yourself? What's that positive affirmation?
Don't give up. Don't give up. My dad used to say, he used to have this saying, is do it now. Because he's one of 4 boys. We had a lot of boys, and they'd all procrastinate, and he goes, just one word, do it now. And that's probably the thing for me, is just get it done. Get up, get it done. Most people know me that I've got a lot of energy and I get stuff done. And I'm just, it's not one word, but it's get it done.
No, I like it. I'm going to use that on my son, because that's one thing. In the morning I always say, you've got to make your bed, because that's your first achievement. And there's a lot of procrastination around that, and now I'm going to use that. Just get it done now, mate.
Just get it done. Get it done. Yeah, get it done.
Yeah. So what's one piece of advice you'd like to share with our audience, especially those who are struggling or overcoming some setbacks, or those who want to move forward? What's the one piece that you'd like to leave with them?
Look, like for instance, this morning I was now, for my age, I'm pretty fit for my age, obviously. And someone said, oh, look, and they were 5 or 6 years younger than me. And they said, oh, how do I get as fit as you? And I said, it's like paint. It's only microscopically thick, but you can't do it. But the thing that you do is consistency. I said, just turn up every single day, just turn up. And the thing that I would say to everybody is, whether it's changing careers or, any challenges you have in the life, is that, if you're down at a particular point in your life, and it's the consistent doing it every single day that will ultimately you'll overcome. And whether it's challenge with your health or anything, every single day, if you're just trying to that little layer of paint every single day, one day you wake up and you go, oh my word, I've done it, or I'm significantly there. But that not giving up and just doing it consistently every day, that's the thing I would say.
Mick, this conversation was extremely interesting, particularly to me, because we kind of walked the same paths for many years, and I appreciate you taking the time today to join me on Blunders to Blessings. Before I wrap this up, I just want to, for me, the key takeaway of our discussion is, number one, very important one, failures don't define you. because often that's the biggest fear that we have as human beings, is that failure defines us, and when it does, it should define us in a positive way, because people who fail are people who are doing things that they've never done before. They're coming outside of their circle or their comfort zone, so they should be commended. So, failures do not define you, and I think both of us would agree that, as we spoke about the length of time that we spent in an industry that we probably, in hindsight, should have moved on quicker. I think this idea of fail quickly, right? But that doesn't take away from the fact that there were silver linings, and also that there were gems that we took away that were priceless, and have given us the opportunities and the capabilities and the possibilities to do what we do today. That's probably the key takeaways for me.
Well, how interestingly enough is that you and I both got to share a passion for marketing, and we see that I had a client talk to me about their marketing challenges the other day, and they were saying that they putting a lot of digital marketing out in the world and it's not getting any traction at all. And and someone told me about an idea of sending this really well-printed package, this physical world. I wonder who that was. And it really had an impact on the prospect that this person was. And he said, look, I've spent thousands of dollars on all this digital stuff, and for the most part, people just scroll past and it's just noise. And they did something in the real world, and it actually had some impact, which puts back into some of the stuff that you and I used to do. So it's funny that the skills that we have got many years ago still got some relevance as a mix of things now. So that's interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think without taking away from the fact that age and the grey hairs that we both have taught us both that people do business with people they like and trust, and so that human element is at the core of marketing, and the technology is a byproduct of different ways of doing things and communicating. Humans are still at the center of marketing, and often overlooked by some marketers, unfortunately. But again, thank you all for listening to Blunders to Blessings with Kerim. Thank you, Michael. Please subscribe, share, and leave a review.